Hello, YouTube, and welcome back to another book review from me, your host, Logan Albright. Today I'm talking about the very meaty and very thought-provoking nonfiction book, The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. This is a book that's been on my radar for a long time. I wanted to read it for a long time, and I finally got around to it. I will say it's not an easy read. This book is about 500 pages long, and Arendt's writing style is very dry and very dense. She packs a lot of information into a few words, and so you really have to kind of pay attention as you're reading it. It's not something you can read quickly. There's a million footnotes. It's very well researched, and this book was written in the early 1950s, kind of right after the end of the Second World War. And Arendt is a philosopher, writer, thinker, political scientist who is of Jewish ancestry, which will be important later. We'll talk about that. And she kind of wanted to understand what had happened with Nazism and Stalinism and where these movements came from and how they happened. And let's try to stop them from happening again, which seems like a good idea. So she wrote this book. And the book is divided into three sections. It's the first section is on antisemitism. The second section is on colonialism. Imperialism, not colonialism. Very similar, but a distinction there. And then the third section is on totalitarianism. And what I found interesting about this book, well, I found many things interesting about this book, but one of the things I found interesting when I first started reading it, and I was in the first section about anti-Semitism, is I think that if she wrote this today, if someone wrote a book like this today, they would be criticized as being anti-Semitic. And of course, I don't think Hannah Arendt was anti-Semitic. She herself was of Jewish ancestry. Seems very unlikely. She's trying to prevent the second Holocaust, basically, and trying to figure out what happened. But there's this idea now that I see a lot in kind of popular discourse that any kind of explanation for a problem or a phenomenon is the same as a justification for it. And that's really bad, because I think it's if you want to stop something from happening, if you want to stop a problem or solve a problem or prevent it from happening again, you really have to understand where it comes from. And in order to understand where it comes from, you have to explain it. But explaining it doesn't excuse it or justify it, but a lot of people think it does, and they get mad and they accuse you of victim blaming and things like that. And I think that's really dumb, because if you're investigating a murder, you look for motive, and when you find the murderer's motive, that doesn't mean the murderer was justified in committing the crime. They're still a murderer, but you want to understand why the person did what they did. And so the first third of this book is Hannah Arendt trying to understand why people are anti-Semitic, why this is such a popular thing, why it sprung up in the middle of the 19th century and kind of took over the European mind all throughout the 20th century. And so I want to be very careful about how I talk about this, because I don't want anyone to be confused and mistake what I'm meaning. But, saying that there are reasons for something doesn't mean that that thing is justified or good. It just means that it doesn't come out of nowhere. It's not random. So she talks about kind of how the Jewish people sort of, after the diaspora, really lacked a national identity. And this was a time when nation states were forming. And this was a big motivating factor in the spread of totalitarianism, was the existence of nation states. Before, there were like provinces and things like that. But suddenly in the 19th century, you have the unification of Germany, you have the unification of Italy, and you have all these people kind of lobbying to get these countries to be one thing. And one of the ways they did that was talking to the people and saying, look, you're all the same. You're all Germans. You're all Italians. You're all Russians. You're all Slavs. And, these people may not have identified with each other in the past. They had, different dialects of the same language, but sometimes mutually unintelligible dialects. They had their own history. They didn't really think of themselves as one people, but part of the effort to create nation states was to unify these peoples and think of themselves as one person or one people. And in that process, you have the Jewish people who have spread all over the world. They're in Germany, they're in France, they're in Poland, they're in Russia, they're in England, they're all over the place. And they sort of stick out a little bit because they have largely their own language, whether it be Hebrew or Yiddish or something like that. They have their own religion. They go around telling people that they're God's chosen people, which rubs some people the wrong way. They tend to be very financially successful and do well, and they can be seen as outsiders. And I think you can see how people looking for a scapegoat might settle on the Jewish people, because they speak a different language and they practice a different religion and they keep to themselves and they seem to have all this money. And that made people mad. So that first section is very interesting, because it tries to understand the problem and diagnose it without trying to excuse why people are the way that they are. So I wanted to be clear on that. And then the second section of the book is on imperialism, which is where, all these countries started really expanding their borders and trying to take over other countries, like the British colony in India, for example. and things like that. And here Arendt, this is the one part of the book that I sort of disagree with Arendt on. She has an explanation for the rise of imperialism, which she says is caused by the rise of capitalism, which results in excess savings. So people had more money than they knew what to do with, and so they had to find new markets to spend that money in, and that's why they had to go around the world and create these imperialist colonies and stuff. My training is in economics. I think that sounds a little dubious, a little fishy, but whatever. Arendt is very smart, so I wouldn't want to contradict her, but that didn't really ring true to me. And then the third section is on totalitarianism, and I found this very relevant to today, and I hesitate to say that because it's very en vogue right now for people to, well, it has been for a long time, for people to make very flippant comparisons of modern politicians to Nazis. And I think this is a bad thing. I don't think we should be doing this. As much as I hate politicians, and I do hate them a lot, I think it's sort of trivializing something that shouldn't be trivialized to compare modern politicians to Nazis or to Hitler and to say that they're the same. I don't think they are. I think it's a very different degree. So I don't agree with that, but there are certainly relevant passages in this book. I am very much on the lookout for rising authoritarianism wherever I see it. I think it's something that really scares me, and it's something that we really need to be on guard against. And you can certainly see passages in this book that you can see where modern day society is starting to head in a more authoritarian direction, and it's pretty scary. So one of the passages that really stood out to me, and I won't quote it exactly because I don't remember it, but I'll paraphrase, is about how the followers of the Nazi Party, there was a mix of gullibility and cynicism in their ranks. And the people on the lower ranks were sort of more gullible, and the people on the upper ranks were more cynical. The higher up you get, the more cynical you get. And there's this cooperation between the elites who think that they're smart enough to run society and control everything, and then the masses, the mob, who are just angry and want some action and want to feel like they're being heard. And those kind of like two extremes of society cooperate in order to put in this ultra-powerful authoritarian government. And anyway, the more cynical people at the top have decided that politics is a game of cheating, and that the only thing that matters is that you cheat better than the other guy. And so their rule that they came to embrace was that the Führer is always right. The person in charge, we have to say they're right no matter what, even if they contradict themselves. And that seems very relevant and very familiar to what's going on today. And so it was kind of chilling to read some of this stuff, and it was very interesting. But I think it's a very important work. I think it's something that anyone who's worried about authoritarianism and wants to understand kind of mob psychology and wants to understand how these things, I mean, to me, this is more illustrative and informative about kind of how masses of people behave and how political movements take hold and the use of propaganda and things like that than it is about how the politicians behave, because the politicians always behave in a bad way. But it's the way that they can manipulate people and to get them to throw their popular support behind movements that end up being very bad. So I really liked it. It's, like I said, it's a difficult read. It took me a long time to get through. It's very boring in a lot of places, although it is good and it's informative and it's nice, but it's not a thrilling read. It's not an exciting read. But I would recommend that anyone who's interested in these topics read it, because it's a classic, and it must have been very impactful writing it right after World War II, while Stalinism was still in full swing. I find that very useful that she was willing to do that. And she's got other books that I am interested in, like on violence. That's something, and I know she is the origin of the phrase, the banality of evil, which she came up with. So that's, other stuff I'd like to check out by her. But yeah, I'm really glad I read The Origins of Totalitarianism by Hannah Arendt. And this, striking, beautiful red, black, and white cover. It really kind of, evokes the kind of ideas she's talking about. Yeah, I'm glad I read it. It took a long time. It was not easy. But I will be back next week with something maybe a little bit more fun, maybe a little bit easier. If you enjoyed this review, please leave me a comment down below and let me know what you thought of The Origins of Totalitarianism or other books by Hannah Arendt or other books that are similar that I maybe should check out. And if you like it, you can always like the video and subscribe to the channel, click that bell for notifications, and check back every Wednesday for another book review, because I try to put one up every single week if I can. I try to keep ahead of the reading schedule. Thanks so much for watching. I've been your host, Logan Albright, and I will catch you next time.